and welcome to Science with Armstrong. In this video, we're going to be looking at population and population growth. What are things that increase a population? Birth and moving in or immigration. What are things that decrease a population? Death, and leaving the population or emigration. When we first look at a population growth, populations tend to start off with exponential growth. Oftentimes, because when a population starts, there must be enough room, enough food for that species to go ahead and get going. Exponential growth can be seen with a J-type curve, where it starts off a little bit slow and then all of a sudden is going to take off. When you have this type of growth, there is plenty of food, space, plenty of mates, and not a lot of competition. Here is the growth curve of the world's population from the time that humans came around to almost present day. You can see that there's a big uptake. That is a time of the Industrial Revolution where we had better medicine, a lot more availability of foods, water, clean water, and we have that exponential growth curve. Currently, the world population is at 4.6 billion people. At some point, if we are growing exponentially and we're starting to run out of our resources, our population growth is going to start to slow. That is logistic growth. Logistic growth is an S curve where we have that level off. So on our graph, we have this area here where we're starting to level. That is referred to as K, or the carrying capacity. Generally, a population will waver over that carrying capacity, where there will be a little bit overshoot, and then when there is not enough, then there'll be an undershoot, and just kind of wave around that K, that carrying capacity. When scientists are measuring populations, and they're trying to figure out how many of that organism are there, one of the ways that they do that is through physically counting. And some populations are hard to physically count. And the method they use for counting, especially like animals that move throughout their habitat, is called mark and recapture, where they will gather as many as they can within a certain amount of space and a certain amount of time, mark them, release them, come back some time later, take that same area, the same amount of time, capture more, and they count how many new versus how many pre-marked organisms they have, and there's a math equation they can kind of throw that into and get a close approximation of how many organisms are available. Something else that's been used in the last few years is called eDNA. It's environmental DNA. When you are in an area, you leave behind DNA. So they can basically take a sample of that area, like the soil or water, and look for these eDNA to see, was there an organism there and how much of this eDNA is there. The more eDNA, more likely there's going to be more of those organisms there. When we look at the distribution of a population, there are three general categories of how they're distributed. One is clumped, where the organisms kind of group together in small little clumps. This way they have protection from a predator, say, that they kind of conglomerate into these clumped groups. We also have random, where they're randomly found throughout. And then you have uniform. And with uniform, there's generally a little bit of territorialness. Sometimes there are birds like penguins that will uniformly distribute themselves. Like, I have a 1 meter radius around me, so don't come into my area or you're gonna fight. When we look at how organisms survive in each age category, it determines how their survivorship at each age category is generally determined on how they reproduce. We have 3 age survivorship curves. We have type 1. Type 1 would be a human, where this is time, and this is the percent organisms surviving. We have, for humans, over time, so if we're thinking like this is age 0 and this is age 100, we have very few individuals at the 100. We have quite a few in the reproductive stage, and then as we get older, less and less of us are here. Then type 2, many songbirds fall into this category. If you look at the distribution, there is a steadily decreasing distribution among ages. So less at the old, more at the new, and every year, less and less of those songbirds are living. And then type 3, type 3 could be like a frog, where they have a lot of young, but then very few actually make it into survival. So frogs tend to have lots and lots of babies. That's why the number is so high, but very few actually make it into adulthood. Songbirds will have like a medium amount of babies, and humans generally only have 1 or 2 babies at a time. And we're looking at reproductive strategies. There's a couple different things that we are looking at. First thing we need to look at is, how do they reproduce? Do they reproduce sexually or asexually? Now, with sexual reproduction, there needs to be 2 organisms involved with the reproduction of that organism. Where asexual, you don't need that mate. The only thing is, with asexual, you are genetic clone of your parent. So if there happens to be a disease that comes through, you don't have a lot of protection because everybody has the same genes. So that disease is more likely to hit and cause a population crash because of that. Where with sexual reproduction, you get a lot of, with sexual reproduction, you do get a lot of that variation within your population. Another thing is semiparity versus heteroparity. Semiparity is when you have lots of babies once, so think like a fish, throwing out a whole bunch of eggs, hoping that one survives. And heteroparity is you might have very few babies more than one time. And humans would fall under this heteroparity. And then the other thing we can look at is R-selected versus K-selected. And when you look at the math equations for how population grows, you can see R-selection versus K-selection. So R-selected has lots of babies with no parental care. K-selected is going to be very few babies and a lot of parental care. So elephants, humans are going to be K-selected. They have 1 baby and they take care of it to make sure it gets to reproductive age. Where R-selected could be something like a dandelion. It has a whole bunch of babies, and when you blow on the little white fuzzball and all of those seeds get dispersed, here's hoping that one of them makes another dandelion. Okay. Things that are going to affect the size of a population. There are density-independent factors. Density-independent are going to be things that affect the population, whether the population is there or not. Natural disasters fit great under here. A hurricane is going to happen whether or not there's a population. If there is a population, it could devastate it. If there's not a population, hurricane's still going to be there, but it's not necessarily going to make any effect. Then we have density dependent, where these depend on a population being there. So something like disease. Disease is not going to happen if there's only one of you there. If I have Ebola and I'm the only one in the entire state, I can't pass on Ebola. Ebola is not going to survive. But if I'm very crowded in a very crowded area and I have Ebola and I spread it to a whole bunch of people, it is now density dependent. It's depending on how many people are actually, or how many organisms are in that population. So the more dense of a population, the more that these factors are going to have an effect. Competition. Predation. If there's no predators, then the prey population will grow. If there's a lot of prey, there's a lot to feed the predators, and the predator population will grow. And they kind of cycle with that. Waste accumulation. Think about bacteria. Think about in areas that don't have a good waste system, where people are drinking the same water that they go to the bathroom in. Dysentery is one of the big killers, diarrhea, and that's because of waste accumulation. Like I said, disease and parasites. Parasites kind of falls along that same idea of disease. If there's nothing there for that parasite to attack and have as a host, then it's not going to survive. Let's shift to specifically human population. We can look at the age structure of a human population to determine how that population is growing. This is an example of an age structure diagram. This one you can see that is kind of in the shape of a nice triangle. When you have a triangle shape age structure, you're generally growing exponentially. This is going to be in our developing countries. And then let's take a look at this one here. This one is a little bit more even. So that's going to be slowing growth. And then when our top becomes heavy, so we have more older people and less younger people, that is going to be decreasing growth. States is currently in that slowing growth phase. Countries like Germany and Japan are actually in this decreasing growth. And in Japan specifically, there is a big problem with too many older people and not enough younger people having children. And looking at the way that their economy is going, they're kind of worried that there's not going to be enough young people to support the economy with so many older people in their population. And that was populations.